My name is Eric C. Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the Freeport Historical Society. We're glad you're here, and we're glad to be back here at Meeting House Arts in the historic First Parish Church building. And thanks to Meeting House Arts' new streaming capacity, for the first time we are live streaming our annual meeting on our YouTube channel. So it's not as exciting as being here in person, to be sure, but it's a wonderful new capability to share our annual meeting with our members who either live or happen to find themselves far from Freeport today. So special thanks to Brad Lehman, who is running our live stream and our sound this afternoon. Also, our president, Mary Babican, is one of those folks who finds herself a great distance away today. So our treasurer, Joe Gervais, will be chairing our business meeting. And so I will turn this over to Joe.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Good afternoon, everyone. Eric neglected to tell me that it was live streaming. Do this. So here we go. So I hereby call to order the annual meeting of the Freeport Historical Society. You will find the President's report from Mary in your agenda booklet. So we will move right to the Executive Director.
Yes, I've tried to keep the live stream secret from as many speakers as possible. So 2025 was an extraordinary year for Freeport Historical Society. We set out to honor the 50th anniversary of the extraordinary gift of Pettengill Farm to FHS from the Smith family. And we spent the year digging deeper, asking more questions, and telling more complete stories. Through 2 new exhibits at Harrington House, we brought fresh research to light, and hundreds of visitors experienced the farm in new ways. We welcomed livestock back to the farm for the first time in over 40 years. Our plaster restoration project, fully funded through grants, stabilized the farmhouse interior and added a new chapter to the study house's story. In September, a packed house here at Meeting House Arts saw playwright and FHS trustee Elizabeth Guffey's new play bring Mildred Pettengill to life in Moments with Millie. And for many in that audience, Millie stopped being just a historical figure and became someone they felt they truly knew. Kathy Smith helped us wrap up the year by looking at the preservation legacy of LMC and Eleanor Houston Smith in Freeport, in Maine, and beyond. Beyond Pettengill, after years away, the FHS garden tour came back as Freeport in Flower. 10 gardens, over 100 visitors and neighbors connecting over something as simple and profound as the care they put into their own little piece of this town. We also welcomed 95 8th grade students from Freeport Middle School for hands-on exploration of local history, touring Harrington House, viewing our exhibitions, and photographing downtown Freeport as part of their place-based learning project. Connecting people of all ages in our community with our community's history is what we do. In 2026, we turn our attention to Freeport's connections to a much larger story. Revolution 250 is the national theme for the 250th anniversary or semi-sesquicentennial of American independence. Semi-quincentennial, is that what I said? Semi-quincentennial. You will hear more about the exhibits that we will be planning for that in our program today. Our work at Pettengill Farm continues. We're thrilled to announce that the Pettengill Trail Restoration Project has been fully funded through the Maine Trails Program with a grant of $73,500 to completely rebuild those trails. Our trails have seen many winter storms, frost heaves, and fallen trees, and Maine Conservation Corps will spend 4 weeks working to rebuild those trails, the slope steps, the stream crossings, and that will bring a true feeling of new life to our trail systems. The work also includes trail amenities like vault privy toilets,
which will be a welcome addition to the farm on any day, but particularly when we have 90 third graders there for 3 hours. And of course, 2026 is our 50th annual Pettingill Farm Day. What began as a members-only brown bag lunch has become one of the most beloved Freeport community events each year. We want to mark this anniversary in a way that reflects everything this community has built together with that event. And to do that, we will be looking for 50 sponsors, businesses, families, and friends who want to support this milestone in a special way. We're also deepening our work with Freeport students. Third graders have already visited Harrington House as part of their geography unit this year, and they will be coming to Pettingill Farm in just a few weeks at the beginning of June. These visits are exactly what this place is for, putting history in the hands of the next generation. We also hope to bring the garden tour back again, but we are still looking for gardens. So if you or someone you know would like to open their landscape to visitors this June, we would love to hear from you. Please speak to Jim DeGrandpré if you have thoughts about that. Finally, I need to tell you that you, Freeport Historical Society, have a remarkable staff. Last year, the Board of Trustees took the calculated risk of adding an additional day of staff time for our community engagement coordinator so that Tim, who has already revolutionized our membership and donor database and streamlined our communications, could spend 1 day a week researching and writing grants. And in those 416 hours, Tim secured $123,000 in grant funding for Pettingill Farm. That was $49,500 in hand last year, and then that $73,500 will draw down this year as part of the Trails grant. And he's just getting started. Tim? Audrey continues to research, document, and share more about Freeport history than I believe anyone else in our history. She continues to expand our understanding of nearly any topic she turns to. We saw that last year with whole new family stories from Pettingill Farm, filling gaps in our knowledge we thought were simply lost to time. She's doing that again with this year's exhibits, which you'll get a sample of in just a few minutes. But she does not appreciate positive feedback. So I will try to keep this negative. Her skills are undeniable, her curiosity is unrivaled, her insights are invaluable, and her impact on this organization is incalculable. Thank you, Audrey. But none of this happens without you. Your membership, your gifts, your time, and your belief in what we do. Thank you for supporting this work. That's what I want. There we go.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I'm pleased now to give you a brief financial report covering how we did in 2025 and what we have planned for 2026. And I'll keep it to the highlights, and I'm happy to answer, Eric would be happy to answer any questions at the end that you may have. So in 2025 was a very strong year for the Society, and I mean that in the fullest sense. Operating revenue came in at just under $249,000, 16% higher than it did in 2024. Expenses were about $256,000, roughly $9,800 over budget, and largely due to higher than anticipated repairs and maintenance to the Harrington House. That expense overage left us with an operating deficit of less than $7,000, actually lower than we had budgeted. And because the board had deliberately adopted a slight deficit plan in order to dedicate more staff time to grant writing, as success was evident with Tim's efforts. That strategy paid off significantly, as Eric just shared. Other income totaled nearly $138,000, including nearly $50,000 in grants for Pettingill Farm and over $74,000 in individual contributions to the Pettingill Farm Preserve campaign. FHS finished 2025 with a total organizational surplus of over $88,000. Our largest source of revenue was annual fund donations and dedicated gifts at nearly $75,000, followed by rental income from our properties at about $62,000. Business sponsorships contributed about $31,000, fundraising events about $26,000, our annual 4% investment draw of $25,000, and membership dues of about $15,000. The remaining revenue, program income, in-kind donations, and miscellaneous receipts accounted for the balance. Looking at expenses, payroll represented 61 cents of every dollar we spend, and it remains our largest cost center at about $157,000. Consistent with prior years and reflecting that we are a people-driven organization, fundraising, utilities, repairs, and insurance ran between $14,000 and $16,000, and administrative expenses came in right at $7,000. Repairs and maintenance ran about $3,500 over budget, reflecting work at the Harrington House and include planned restoration of our shutters and unplanned repair to our boiler. Looking at 2026, the board has approved a budget designed to sustain core operations while maximizing grant opportunities. Operating revenue is budgeted at about $239,000, conservatively below the 2025 actuals. The projected operating deficit is about $7,000, but we have already secured $73,500 in grant funding from the Main Trails Program for Pettingill Trail reconstruction, and with additional applications outstanding. That puts us on track for another strong organizational surplus in 2026. Revenue targets are in line with last year's results, with a shift in our sponsorship target of $38,000, up from about $31,000 last year. Annual fund and donations, including dedicated gifts, is budgeted at about $76,500. Investment draw and fundraising events are each budgeted at $25,000, and membership is steady at $15,000. Looking at expenses, expenses are budgeted at just under $246,000 with a 2.5% cost of living adjustment, bringing payroll to about $148,000. Repairs and maintenance is focused on the Harrington House priorities at about $11,600. Fundraising expenses are increased to $18,000 to support our expanded sponsorship outreach activities, and utilities at $17,000 with insurance at $15,000. Looking at the four-year trend, revenue has grown substantially since 2022. And the 2026 budget keeps expenses well managed. Our goal is to continue building toward an operating model that is less dependent on grant and special income to close that gap, and we are making real progress. Finally, a word on our balance sheet. Total assets stand at just over $2 million. The largest component is our property. Buildings, lands, and improvement values are about $1.24 million net of depreciation expense. We also hold over $650,000 in long-term investments. Total liabilities are just about $28,000. And for an organization with over $2 million in assets, that is an exceptionally strong, nearly debt-free position. Bottom line is that Freeport Historical Society is financially sound. Are there any questions related to the finance report that Eric would like to answer? Okay, seeing no further questions, the Treasury report is accepted as presented. And I will now invite Jim de Grand Prix forward to present the nominating committee report. Jim.
Thank you, Joe. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all here today. As chair of the nominating committee, I have the pleasure of presenting the slate of nominees to serve as trustees of Freeport Historical Society. We have 2 new trustee nominations this year. First is Courtney Kennedy, who moved to Freeport in 2022 and lives on Wolf's Neck, where she serves as president of the Wolf's Neck Club. She holds degrees from Holy Cross, Dartmouth, Babson, and UC Berkeley. Well done, Courtney. And has held leadership roles at Netflix and Apple. She currently works as an engineering manager at Grafana Labs and has developed a keen interest in how technology can help make historical materials more widely accessible. Courtney is nominated for a 2-year term. Second is Tom Bull, a lifelong resident of Freeport who attended the original Soul School in South Freeport. He graduated from St. Lawrence University, served 8 years as state representative for Freeport and Powell, and has been active in community service through the Freeport Fire Department, Freeport Community Services, and Freeport Conservation Trust. Tom works at Revision Energy, and Tom is nominated for a 3-year term. Then we have 4 returning trustees that are nominated for new additional terms. That is Mary Babican, Sally Walsh, Audrey Lynch, and David Shahadi, each for a 3-year term. The nominating committee hereby nominates Courtney Kennedy, Tom Bull, Mary Babican, Sally Walsh, Audrey Lynch, and David Shahadi to serve as trustees. On behalf of the nominating committee, I move that nominations be closed and the secretary cast 1 vote for this slate of nominees.
Thank you, Jim. It has been moved to close nominations and elect the slate of nominees. Coming from a committee, this does not require a second. Is there any discussion? So seeing none, I will call for a vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? The motion carries. Nominations are closed, and the secretary will cast a ballot to elect the nominees. Congratulations to all. I'll turn it back over to Jim for the election of officers.
Okay. The nominating committee also nominates the following officers, each for 1-year terms. Mary Babican, President. Lynn Sullivan, Vice President. Polly Brand, Secretary. And Joe Gervais, Treasurer.
Our bylaws dictate that the Board of Trustees elect our officers at our annual meeting. I would invite our Board of Trustees to please stand. Those in favor of electing the slate of officers, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Officers are elected.
So what is also, we need to acknowledge in the election of the new trustees is that we have 1 trustee who is stepping off of the board, which is Jim DeGrandpre. And we have a term limit of 3 terms, 3 3-year terms. So Jim is stepping off after 11 years out of the 9 that you are allowed to serve. However, something very interesting just happened, which is that Jim is actually filling in for Nora Healy, who hadn't been here, but he, without hesitation, identified himself as the chair of the nominating committee. And so that really has no time limit, and we hopefully will be seeing Jim for quite some time. So thank you, Joe. So I now have the task of presenting the George Denny Award, which you may remember, Freeport Historical Society established in 2022. Our first recipient of the George Denny Award was Jim Cram, followed by Kathy Smith, and then David Coffin, and then Rebecca Hotelling. All of them who exemplify George's long-term dedication to the people and history of Freeport and abundant generosity toward the mission and goals of the Freeport Historical Society. What's interesting here is that now I need the binder because those notes are not on my screen. This year, the recipient of this year's George Denny Award arrived in Freeport more than 50 years ago, and by his own admission, found it underwhelming. A quiet backwater, he thought, so before long he set about making it better, and he has not stopped since. His history is woven into ours in ways that feel almost inevitable. In October of 1968, Mr. and Mrs. LMC Smith, the same Eleanor and LMC Smith who would go on to give Pettingill Farm to Freeport Historical Society, invited an experienced organic farmer and his family to come to Maine to help develop their visionary organic farm at Wolf's Neck. The family lived in the Little River Farmhouse, which still stands at Wolf's Neck Center today. In 2020, the town of Freeport named this person Citizen of the Year, recognizing more than 5 decades of contributions to education, commerce, agriculture, youth development, social services, historical preservation, and just about every other corner of community life that you can name. The citation noted that he has touched hundreds of lives and that there is little you won't find him involved in and ready to help out with. Anyone who has ever worked alongside him knows that this is exactly right. At Freeport Historical Society, he served on our board of trustees for 11 years, including as president. He brought to this board the same qualities he brings to everything: deep knowledge of the community, practical experience in buildings and maintenance, and a spirit of generosity that made everyone around him work a little harder and enjoy it a little more. If you've eaten at a recent Pettingill Farm Day, you have him to thank because he has donated nearly all of the food at our food tent for years and been on hand to serve it with characteristic good humor and boundless energy. He has been an invaluable connector to deepen our partnership with Wolf's Neck Center. But now in his retirement, which many of you know is much busier than working, he has signed on to even more work at Freeport Historical Society. He came to Freeport because a family connected to this land and the values of stewardship and community. He decided to stay, and then quietly, persistently, generously, he turned that quiet backwater into a place worth staying for. It is my honor to present the 2026 George Denny Award to Jim DeGrand Prix. You get this lovely, historic, antique shoe last, which is not yet engraved for you. But you also get, of course, the official George Denny Award, which is
Yes, they get $2 Chuck.
the sacred bottle of $2 Chuck, this year's vintage 2022, with George's preferred drinking vessels of red Solo cups.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's very kind of you, very kind of you. I knew George and Joyce Denny, of course, as so many of us did, and what an honor to be receiving an award that's named after them. They're terrific. And I have had such fun at the Historical Society. Has been, I think, when at our last meeting, I was counting up, and I've been on the board for 132 board meetings. And I thought to myself, that's somebody really ought to step away at that point. It's really time to sort of let others come in. So anyway, though, it's been my pleasure, my honor. The trustees I've worked with have been absolutely the best. Eric is, wherever you went there, Eric is absolutely unbelievable, and Audrey and Tim. We have such a fine organization, and we're doing so very well. So thank you all today for coming to celebrate that, and thank you very much for this award.
Thank you, Jim, and congratulations again. So that brings us to the end of our business meeting. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? All in favor? Aye. All right. The meeting is adjourned, but our program continues now with a presentation by our Collections and Education Manager, Audrey Wolf.
Yes, that's a great question. I had to look for. Is it this? No. What's that? Here you go. Yes.
Ah, excellent. How's this? Good? Perfect. Well, good afternoon, and thank you all again for joining us today. As Eric said, I'm Audrey Wolf. I'm the Collections and Education Manager at the Freeport Historical Society. And it is my pleasure to speak with you once again at the annual meeting, more about what we've done this past year in research and more of what we're going to be doing. Like Eric mentioned, we, like many historical societies and organizations across the country, are participating in the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, called Revolution, or Rev 250. Now, I do want to admit that we picked this topic years ago, before the current political moment has brought some of those revolutionary themes back into the public discourse. But I think that timing is worth noting. With my time with the Historical Society, I've been struck that every time something big or small happens in the world, we inevitably get a call from someone saying, well, what do you know about this? How has Freeport handled this before? And the answer is almost always, it's complicated. So let's talk about that complication first. Let's talk about how we've grounded other celebrations focused on 1776. Then we'll take a look at our exhibitions for the upcoming year. We'll mention some of the new insights we've gleaned along the way. And finally, we won't just be talking about history, we'll be experiencing it. Music was vital to the life of 18th century people. And we're going to ask you to join in, be brave, and join us on a few of these historic tunes tonight. You have the lyrics in your handout, and I will not be leading you in song. I'm going to let Eric and Jan do that, so don't worry, you will be in good hands. So let's begin. When the nation hit its 100th anniversary in 1876, we were just 11 years out of the Civil War and in a deep economic recession. One of the ways in which we tried to heal those wounds was holding a massive centennial exhibition in Philadelphia, specifically to highlight industrial progress, which you can see here, what this is showing. But people from the South would note that it mostly highlighted northern industrial progress, so it didn't quite heal all wounds. Still, crowds were introduced to such things like prototypes of the telephone and typewriter, and even the torch of the Statue of Liberty. I love this dress here because I think it shows that we have always loved branded content and souvenirs. This is a dress made out of the centennial handkerchiefs that they sold at the event. The 1876 celebration was also heavily focused on characters. Liberty and Uncle Sam and the founding fathers treated less like historical figures and more like icons, and no one got this treatment more than George Washington. Here he is blessing the marriage of Liberty and Uncle Sam. The 1970s were a similar stressful era marked by the Vietnam War and Watergate and economic stagnation. But the bicentennial also featured an upsurge of grassroots history, local history, and funding for local history, and widening the narrative lens beyond the founding fathers. The era was marked by the rise of bicentennial chic, and for historical societies like ours, the two most common items donated to us was one, anything that could be crocheted, and probably a few things that should not have been. And the number one object that we were donated several times was spinning wheels. These past anniversaries remind us that commemorations are less about the past, and they're more about the present. They're mirrors. Different generations use them to renegotiate their identity, their values, and their conflicts. And conflicts and protest have always been part of the story. On July 4th, 1876, Susan B. Anthony charged down the aisle of Independence Hall in Philadelphia. She and her fellow suffragettes had been denied a booth at the main exhibition. She interrupted a reading of the Declaration of Independence to read the Declaration of the Rights of Women instead. The protest highlighted for them the hypocrisy of celebrating liberty when more than half of the nation was denied the right to vote. For them, they argued that women were living under a government that they had not consented to, much like the original grievances of 1776. The bicentennial featured intense fighting on who owned the memory of the revolution. Groups like the People's Bicentennial Commission protested the corporate and commercial focus of the official events, which annoyed the politicians and the companies who felt like they owned the commemorations. And how did Freeport celebrate? We did what we did best. We put on a parade. I mention all of this not to be cynical, but instead to give us permission to embrace the complications and opportunities that these celebrations hold, and to let you know a little bit of how we've approached the work this year. When tackling topics like this, we like to start with what we already know, what we've already researched, not so much as the foundation from which to do our work, but how to understand how our own organization has participated in historical memory making. Our work last year on the Pettingill property validated this approach, honoring what we knew or what we thought we knew, while also starting fresh. So as a reminder, as Eric said, this is how we talked about that property's history for 49 years. And this is how we tell that story now. Starting fresh gained our community so many more stories and people to add to the narrative. So what did we know? What have we said about Freeport in the Revolution? Practically nothing. Even trying to find a list of veterans was challenging, and when you could find a list, they often disagreed with one another. When I went to the file folder, so helpfully titled Freeport in the Revolution, there were only two pieces of paper in the file folder. One was a list of veterans with more than a third of the names crossed out for whatever reason. And the second was a list of books a volunteer had consulted, mostly secondary sources, with the ultimate finding note of Freeport, part of North Yarmouth. Nothing happened here. For this year, it wasn't so much about starting fresh, but starting. But I think it's those efforts that have really paid off for our exhibitions this year. As I mentioned before, we only had 42 veterans, only somewhat reliably identified as either having lived in Freeport or having been from Freeport to serve. And now we add over 98 names to that list for a total of 140. We went through 160 pension records, literally thousands of documents. And in there, we not only gained their first-hand stories of living here and their time in the war, but also 106 new family members, new family connections, people we either didn't know anything about or knew very little about. And also, as part of this work, we processed 3 of our own collections. All of that work informs the exhibitions at the FHS for the next year, one of which is Flashpoints, and the other is The Flames Kindled, Freeport and the War for Independence. In Flashpoints, we'll take you from 1750 to the fall of 1775. We'll look at the moments that tipped settlers towards independence and what our connection is to some of some infamous events. Among others, you'll meet people like Abraham Mitchell, a 7 years war veteran whose account book we have, and what our connection is to the oldest surviving military vessel in the United States. And we will let you hear directly from the inhabitants of 1774 about whether or not they'll participate in protests, boycotts, and what they think about separating from Britain is. In The Flame is Kindled, we'll take you from the burning of Falmouth, now Portland, in 1775, through the course of the war and into the community that Freeport will become. You'll learn about some of the major battles and how they touched Freeporters, but the exhibition will also introduce you to those the revolutionary narratives left out, the women, the children, and the elderly who stayed at home, keeping the community alive during some pretty desperate conditions. You'll meet soldiers like James McCormick, a not quite convicted murderer, and his ties to Benedict Arnold. You'll hear from veterans and their families directly through their pension and veteran testimonies. And you'll learn more about how our community changed after the war ended, who was set up to thrive here, and who, like Richard Jewell, a Black and Indigenous veteran, was not. Now, working in this time period does have a few challenges. I've mentioned already our own lack of research. And the other big hang-up is that resources are scattered. A lot of them are in Massachusetts, Maine being part of Massachusetts at the time, and some of them in North Yarmouth, as Freeport had not set off from North Yarmouth until 1789. The other challenge is that exhibits are also not books on the walls. So really only a small fraction of what we've learned can ever make it into the exhibition, which is why programs like this and the programs that we'll put on this year are especially vital. Visually, we have an issue, and that it's a lot of beige. As an experience, this time period is notoriously difficult to convey because the medium that survives, paper and faded ink, does not do the people of the 18th century justice in terms of the color and vibrancy that their life held. And just as we often don't think about what their life would have looked like in terms of color, we don't think about it in terms of smell and texture and sound, which is how we've decided to help bring you closer into the 18th century. Throughout the exhibition, we will have period-appropriate and researched music that will help tell the story as you go through the exhibition. Now, during this era, music was rarely for passive listening. It was almost always connected to something active, whether that was social, spiritual, or political. And in the exhibition, you'll hear examples of all of these. The first three we'll talk about a little bit right now, and sacred music we'll come back to at the end. In the exhibition, you'll hear broadside ballads, which were lyrics printed on cheap sheets of paper, usually sold for a penny at the corner, and they never were really printed with music. They were only printed with the lyrics and indicated what was called a common tune, like Greensleeves, that everyone already knew. And the topics ran the gamut. These are examples of narrative or storytelling ballads or morality ballads. This one on your right here is The Ship Carpenter, which is sort of the adventure of the life at sea. And the other is, and forgive me, this is from 1755, this is not me, about why you should never trust a lawyer. By the 1750s and 1760s, broadsides became the primary vehicle for protest and political satire. They even allowed the illiterate to participate in the growing revolutionary movement through song. These examples here are of the Boston Massacre, a song for that, and the one over here is for, it's called the Liberty Song, which was the anthem of the Sons of Liberty that they would sing before every meeting. Now, during the war, the broadside ballads were heavily focused on manliness, how to be a man, and mocking whoever was losing at the time. This example on the left here is actually a Maine soldier's orderly book in which he jotted down several of the tunes that were sung in camp over the years, and all of them pretty unfavorable to women. In the exhibit, you will also hear examples of military and work songs and folk songs. The fife and drum were not for entertainment. They were essential communication tools, used to signal movements, wake soldiers up, and regulate the rhythm of marching. Work songs like she shanties and spinning songs and harvest songs synchronized physical labor while also making the work more efficient and safer. This example here is actually really fascinating. This is a sketch of the Battle of Bunker Hill done by British General Henry Clinton. And he made that sketch on the back of a folk song. This folk and work song, John Barleycorn, is an English of Scottish origin and was almost 200 years old by the time that he sketched it on the back. John Barleycorn is a celebration of barley, but is mostly a celebration of the beer that is made from it. Pretty typical for a military encampment. Now, one song you actually will not hear in the exhibit, it was actually the most popular song of the Revolutionary era, and that is Yankee Doodle. While the painting here is most known as The Spirit of '76, when it debuted at the 1876 centennial, it was titled Yankee Doodle. Like almost all of these songs, we don't know exactly who came up with the song or the lyrics. Because the song was a common tune, so again, one of those tunes that was so ubiquitous that people could make lyrics up on the fly, there isn't one Yankee Doodle at the time. Still, we do know that the shell of the song was created by the British during the 7 Years' War. So the British are coming over to the colonies, meeting their counterparts for the very first time, and they are, quite frankly, shocked. They are shocked by how disorganized and how shabbily dressed the colonial Yankee militias are. The lyrics on the left here are generally considered the original, or at least the 1750, 1760 version of the song, and the broadside is from 1770, and it more or less is considered what was standard to sing at that time. That song is from the point of view of a country bumpkin going to a military camp for the very first time. In either case, Yankee Doodle Dandy was a triple insult. Yankee being a term of derision for the British, for the Americans, doodle being a fool or simpleton, or even a vulgar slang term, which I will let you ponder on, and dandy being someone who was overly concerned with how they looked or dressed, a further mocking insult to the Americans who were not. So it started as a British insult, but it became American. Because as the Americans started winning in the 1770s, they started to sing it back to the British. They started to taunt them with it, mainly saying, well, if we are so simple and backwards, why are we winning? So it is one thing to read a 250-year-old insult. It's another thing to actually sing it the way the troops did. So this is the moment. We've arrived. Grab your handouts. And let's see how this sounded when the American soldiers sang it back at the British after a victory. So I am going to let Eric and Jan take it away here.
This is not a performance, this is everyone collectively, just to be clear. Jan's going to do a little introduction, and then we'll start.
Wonderful. So the current lyrics with ponies and feathers and macaronis that we all learned growing up actually wasn't put into print until 1842. So it was inevitably sang before then, but that's the first traceable moment of those lyrics. And we know it was probably used earlier because of these two sketches. So on the left here is a sketch from 1778 that an American engraver working in London made of Yankee Doodle, or the American Satan, mockingly pairing that look of a serious-looking young man with the tune that would suggest otherwise. And on the right is a cartoon of a father literally poking fun of his son, who had become a macaroni. The Macaroni Club was a group of young elite men known for their extreme European fashions, particularly French and Italian. So for decades after the Revolution, Yankee Doodle was the official, unofficial, patriotic anthem of the United States until 1931, when the Star-Spangled Banner became the national anthem. So you will not hear Yankee Doodle in the exhibition, but you will hear the second most popular song of the Revolution, and that is Chester. I told you before that we would return back to sacred music and its place in the American Revolution, and that's because in the 1770s, something really interesting starts happening in New England's congregational churches. Sacred music becomes politicized. And that is in large thanks to this man, William Billings of Boston, a tanner by profession, an elected hog catcher, a failed literary writer and editor, a snuff addict, a bombastic singer, a Sons of Liberty member, and America's first composer. And he has a pretty wonderful connection to Freeport that we'll talk about here in a minute. Born in 1746 to a poor Boston family, he leaves any formal schooling by the age of 14, which is when his father dies. He takes up the work of tanning, which is the profession that he will have for his entire life. Now, tanning is notoriously physical, grueling, awful work. Tan yards are almost always required to be at the outskirts of town due to their noxious smell. And since tanning was actually seasonal work, Billings took on odd jobs throughout the year, for Boston specifically, like street cleaning or hog catching. Now, contemporaries describe a man of unforgettable appearance and demeanor. He was blind in one eye, he had a withered arm, he had legs of two mismatched sizes, and he simply did not care what he looked like. And he was one of these people that when you asked him to please sing or talk softer, he talked louder. And yet, despite having no formal or very little music education, Billings became America's first truly professional composer. And what do we mean by American composer? What do historians mean by that? Well, generally, you have to have all three. You're born in America, you make your own lyrics, and you make your own songs. And remember, like I said, those tunes that people were singing were common tunes, pretty much up until this point, transplanted from Europe. You would get lots of different songs, but it was the lyrics that were changing, not so much the music. Over his prolific career, Billings produced 6 tune books and over 300 original sacred compositions. Before Billings and the regular singing music, which is what it was called, congregational churches practiced the usual way, which is called lining out. And what that meant is that someone would stand here and would read or chant a single line back to the congregation, and the congregation would echo it back to them. And because everyone sang at their own pace, everyone sang at their own tune, everyone sang at their own pitch, it made a dissonant sound that critics of the town simply called, and I quote, weird. Billings' push for singing was singing by rule, reading musical notation, replacing the slow, uncoordinated chanting with unified rhythmic timing. The regular method of singing we know was actually here by 1765 because of our church records. And the records show the adoption of Dr. Isaac Watts, who in England pushed for hymns of human composure, which replaced the strict word-for-word biblical translations. Billings took this idea of human-made and made it distinctly American. I don't think myself confined to any rules for composition laid down by any that went before me. He believed that nature was the best dictator, and his compositions frequently violated the standard harmonic theory of European music. As for content, it's Billings' distinctly American mindset that made his work so revolutionary. His first publication in 1770 was the New England Palm Singer, which was the first published collection of entirely American composed music. Billings was, like I said, a member of the Sons of Liberty and fiercely patriotic. His friend, Paul Revere, not only made this drawing and engraving, but also did all of the drawings and engravings for the music in the book. Billings radically merged devotional songs with the American independence movement. He treated the Bible as raw material, rewriting scripture to cast the Americans as God's chosen people and the British as the tyrannical oppressors. And we know that Billings' works becomes incredibly popular thanks in parts to letters and church records that show that his music is supplanting what was there before. Now, I do want to underscore this because by law in the 18th century, you were required to go to church on the Lord's Day, unless you had a necessary excuse, it was called. And in Massachusetts, and therefore Maine, the Congregational Church was the standing church, which meant that you had to support the church and its upkeep through taxes, whether you wanted to or not. So think about yourself as an 18th century individual. Let's say that you happen to avoid music most of the time, right? After all, not everyone goes to taverns, not everyone does the same work, not everyone is in the militia, but you went to church, which means that hearing Billings' pro-American hymnals became the ultimate propaganda tool for independence-minded churches and towns. In his famous anthem, Chester, he replaced the traditional religious themes with a highly partisan declaration that it was specifically New England's God that forever reigns. Now, this here is the only verse of this song that he produced in 1770, which is what we're going to sing here in a moment. But you might know the other verses as well, which are verses that he did in 1778. He added on to it as the Americans started having victories. But first, to fully and really understand how effective this music is as a political tool, we have to hear it. And so this is, once again, I'm going to ask you to be brave. And you have the handouts, and we have it up here on the screen. This one's short, and I'm going to hand it over to Eric and Jan.
So we are going to sing, just as Audrey said, that first verse, which was published in 1770. Jan's going to play it through once, and I just want to underscore what Audrey said, which was that William Billings felt no compunction to stay within any sense of musical theory. So I have been trying to learn this for weeks, and it's still a challenge for me. So good luck. Believe it or not, that was better than the usual way that they used to have. So, what's Billings' connection to Freeport?
This is one of those research moments as a historian that gives you goosebumps. And also, unfortunately, is one of those things that will never make it into an exhibition. As you may surmise, Billings as a person and Billings for his music is well studied. There are lots of books, lots of journal articles about him. But for all that we know about him, only one single letter of his is known to exist. And that one single letter is from him to Asa Lewis of North Yarmouth, and it's about his time here. I mentioned that tanning was a seasonal business. And so in between doing that work and going to Sons of Liberty meetings and hog catching, Billings ran singing schools. To sing Billings' complex music, as you have experienced, communities needed trained singers, which led to the explosion of singing schools at the time. Singing masters would go town to town and hold classes several times a week and many months in one location. And while the official goal of the schools was religious and musical education, it just so happened to also be the very first time there was even a secular reason for men and women to mingle. And as these trained singers graduated, they were seated together in the choir, effectively giving birth to the first volunteer church choir. And that is how Billings gets here. This is this letter here. This is the only letter we have of his. Over the fall and early winter of 1780, we hired William Billings to run a singing school. He was likely hired by prominent local patriots, Jeremiah Dummer Powell and John Lewis, Asa's father, whom he met in Massachusetts while petitioning for copyright protections for his works. And those two men sat on that committee. The letter features several wonderful highlights. It is short, but there's some really good ones here. It features the borrowing and the wearing out of Asa Lewis's coat, which William Billings was so embarrassed that he had run to the ground that he didn't want to give it back to him. There's the hint that William Billings is employing the Lewis family as their roles as land agents, and the procurement of some of the raw material that he needed for tanning, bark and wood. Timber and its byproducts are by far Maine's still #1 export. And for Billings, this trip probably had the added bonus of being able to procure those raw materials firsthand rather than having to go through a third party. And it's that wooden bark that we get the hint of what Freeport specifically was up to during the Revolution. If you will send my bark at Talbot's and my wood at Stout's Point, I will reward you handsomely. Even these few lines in a letter give us precious insight into how Freeport was operating during the Revolution. By 1780, Freeport was in a significantly better position to undertake this type of business than before. For one, travel between Casco Bay and Boston was generally considered safe, in large part because the war at that time had moved to the south. And since the destruction of Portland in 1775, other areas rose up to take those opportunity costs away from Portland while they were still rebuilding. Now, we knew that these factors would be things that would launch Freeport into its shipping and shipbuilding era after the Revolution. But what we didn't quite know, and what this helps show, is just how much this was happening during the course of the Revolution. It's laying the groundwork for the Freeport that will become. We also happen to know that Billings' instruction here was effective because our church records by 1783 show that the choir was fighting with each other. They have fought about how they should order themselves, that they couldn't just kick each other out of the choir if they wanted to, and they actually had to be elected by a committee. Now, William Billings' story has a bittersweet end. Although Billings enjoyed a rather prosperous time during the Revolution, by the 1790s, he has declined spectacularly. He died in poverty in 1800 and is buried in an unmarked grave in Boston Common. So, Freeport, part of North Yarmouth. Nothing happened here. We know that that could not be further than the truth. Our efforts that you have supported have recovered hundreds of people back into the community narrative. And those efforts connect you directly, firsthand, with people's voices, and they can tell you directly what it was like to live here during that time. For me, the story that emerges is less about a quiet settlement waiting for history to happen to it, but instead a vibrant, complicated community, navigating the realities of war and laying the groundwork for the community that Freeport would become. And we know that there are more stories waiting. So before we close, be brave once again with me, and let's experience that piece of history together exactly as Freeporters would have in the 18th century. And let's make our own form of commemoration again. Let's sing all verses of Chester. Or maybe not all verses? The director says yes.
Excellent. That's great. Excellent. How did you do? Good. Thank you, Audrey. Once again, as I mentioned before, what Audrey is bringing to this work and what she's able to find in terms of increasing both the depth and the breadth of our understanding of many different time periods in Freeport's history is truly remarkable. And I encourage you to ask any questions you have as we move to the reception. So thank you very much for being here today, and we will see you in the other room in just a moment. Thank you.